Well, it's my privilege to introduce our first speaker, Meg Elis. Is an author and translator and lives in Llandovery in Arabon. She writes novels and short stories and writes reviews regularly for Welsh language and Welsh interest magazines. She's a member of the in Wales and has served on the Liturgical Commission of the church from the 70s to 1990s. She will be discussing today the forgotten family, W.J. Rees, Casgob, and the family of the Tonn in Llandovery. We look forward very much to hear her presentation on that particular family. So, a warm welcome, Meg Elis. Well, the famous family of the Tonn, said Dr. Mary Elis when she wrote about W.J. Rees, Casgob. And at the beginning, I have to pay tribute to my mother because I'm really depending a lot on her work for the material this morning. A famous family. Well, time has told, and that fame has dimmed by now. But there was a reason why they were famous, and there is a reason to continue to remember the contribution, not just to Welsh literature, but to the history of the church and history of the Welsh language in the church at the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th. They were quite a rich family, and they rejoiced in the fact that their ancestors included Brychan Brycheiniog and the Lords of Llandovery, and their estate was quite a substantial one. The family home has disappeared a long time ago, but we have the Tonn collection in the what used to be called the Free Library of Cardiff, and which is there for historians to use up to today. Is it too much a hope that we may hear more about the Rees family when the Steddfod is coming to Llandovery? So I'll be dealing with W.J. Rees, one of the family today, but I want to go forward in time for a while and to look at, firstly, two of his nephews, the brothers Rees and William Rees. There's in this series, we've already heard about Rees. He was the first Welsh teacher at Lampeter College. He was a son to Sarah, the younger sister of W.J. Rees, and he was born in 1804. He was in Lampeter Grammar School when Elias Williams, who was head there, who believed in providing a sure foundation education, and Rees loved it there. But Elias died suddenly in January 1820. It was left, the school was left in the care of an ineffective assistant teacher, and Rees got fed up, and he was taken by Casgob, by his father to Casgob, to use the library of W.J. Rees, and Rees said that he learned more with his uncle, more than in any school, and W.J. Rees said he worked with commendable diligence, and when he left Casgob, he said it was a pleasing employment to prepare for his launch into the wide waters. In Jesus College, Oxford, he graduated and is due to Llywelyn. Llywelyn, who became the head of Lampeter College later, and Rees made such an impression on him that Rees was offered the post of tutor in classics and in Welsh. And Rees went back to Casgob to improve his Welsh and to learn more about Old Welsh literature, and he became a member of the college staff before becoming a deacon. In 1828, he was priested in Lampeter, and then he began his and after he began his career in a college, he became examiner of priests who were to be sent to Welsh church-speaking churches. He was an editor and a writer. He edited some of Canwyll y Cymru, the work of the Vicar Pritchard, and he was going to write a grammar of the Welsh language and on the Welsh history. But in 1829, he fell over the office horse on his way back to Casgob and died before he could achieve that. Now, William Rees followed his uncle David Rees as a printer, and they were known as DR and W. Rees, printers and publishers. After his uncle retired in 1835, William took over the work completely, and he's known in Welsh history for the one who published the Refengylydd ar Haul, which is edited by Brutus to defend the church from the attacks of the nonconformists. Well, if we were to say everything about William Rees and the Haul and Brutus's fiery contributions, that would take all this presentation. But William Rees, with his evangelical and conservative views, was very much a contribution to Welsh literature and the press, and in forming the Welsh Manuscript Societies. So now we go back in time to the uncle, to W.J. Rees, and see how he this amazing man contributed to interest in the old literature of the Welsh people. He was a leading figure in the provincial Eisteddfodau, and definitely before his time, condemning the Anglicisation of some Welsh people and the church as well. And through all this, he was a rural vicar of great commitment. He was born in Llandovery in 1772. He graduated from Wadham College in Oxford, and he was made a deacon in Herefordshire in 1796. After 4 years as a curate there, he became the rector of Casgob in Radnorshire in 1806, and there he stayed for the rest of his life. W.J. Rees had already published booklets and sermons, and this didn't come to an end after he'd moved to Casgob. In July 1805, he preached in the ESPCK and the Church Union in St. Peter's Church, Carmarthen. And the sermon was published at the running area. The Church Union is central to the history of the literary parsons in Wales, and Thomas Burgess set it up as soon as he came to the bishopric. It's not to do with church unity, but it's to bring the members of the Church of England to oppose papism and nonconformity. Burgess wanted to create day schools and Sunday schools creating a library for the clerics, and sharing Bibles and tracts. His hope was to establish a college for candidates for the ministry. Thomas must have foreseen that W. Rees could have helped him in achieving these aims. That's one reason why he asked him to preach in the society's meeting. And he's seen that the clerical meetings in Llandovery, where W. Rees was rural dean, were so effective. So one member there would preach on a particular subject, and then those listening would write notes about it. W. Rees was made rural dean o Llandovery, Syston, in 1812. And he got into contact with the rural dean Llandovery uwchaethon, John Jenkins, better known as Ifor Cefri. And when they met, they had started a very fruitful friendships.
Relating to the fabric of the churches, medda W. Rees mewn llythyr ato fo.
W. Rees in a letter to him after it had been welcomed in Kerry, as well as discussing the charity school in Kerry and the parish fences. They had time to socialise, and W. Rees that he had been
I have to thank you for introducing me to the Welsh bard, and should you anywhere meet him, please to signify my respect for him. Mae o'n cyfeirio hefyd at our next cleric.
He refers as well to our next clerical Eisteddfod at Kerry, whenever it may take place. And that as early as 1813. And it shows that the clerical meetings in Ifor Kerry's home met regularly well before there was any talk of the Cambrian societies or the provincial Eisteddfodau. W. Rees used to go to London in May each year. That was the opportunity to see the bookshops, because he was a great collector and reader of books. He would look at the catalogues and study them carefully before going. In London, there was a great development in his life, which was Cymdeithas Cymru Gwyddorion. Now, the Cymrodorion Society had come to an end in 1787, but there were some people who wanted to see it re-established after a successful Carnarvon, and one expected in Powys in 1820, and later in Gwynedd. Ifor Kerry wanted things to get moving in London. He was already in corresponding to John Berry Bowen Allel, and he asks him about establishing a Cambrian society in London soon. And he was advised that the best way to do this was to re-establish the Cymrodorion, because which was better than trying to establish a completely new society. And Allel wrote to William Owen Pugh to ask him about it, and he also approved of it and suggested that people should consult the noblemen and leading gentlemen in Wales, by whom he meant the MPs and the nobility who had houses in London and in Wales. Allel sent a copy of this letter to Ifor Kerry, and said that he'd asked Pugh to be the temporary secretary for the society. He said that Sir Watkin Wynne and his brother Charles Williams Wynne were supportive. What was important was to find some active gentleman member of either a society in the principality to start the king. And they were carrying you about just that active gentleman. As W.G. Rees started from London in May 1820, he had the orders from Ifor Kerry. I've had work to do with the Wrexham Eisteddfod that year, and visiting Barnarlaw and Bawdr Benrin, and going to a silversmith to sort out the medals as prizes. He was supposed to see Sir Watkin Williams win. Gwynllan had written already to Sir Watkin saying that W.J. Rees, to call him, prepared him, was what Ifor Kerry said, as if J. Rees was some kind of a beast to be feared. But Gwynllan asks Sir Watkin to think seriously about re-establishing the Cymrodorion Society, and that W.G. Rees would be the best man to do that and help Sir Watkin. See, Ifor Kerry saw the other advantages of establishing the Cymrodorion, because they had owned the library in the Welsh school, and there they could actually keep their manuscripts and books, and that was what W.G. Rees was supposed to ask Sir Watkin about. And his work was successful. The Cymrodorion was re-established in the Freemasons Tavern in June 1820, and the Metropolitan Cymru Institution was added to the name in order to establish its relationship to the provincial societies. So, and they wanted to further the Welsh language and literature and to collect Welsh language manuscripts and other Welsh manuscripts. During his time at W.G. Rees, W.G. Rees followed Ifor Kerry's directions. Ifor Kerry wanted W.G. Rees to make sure that the date of the Eisteddfod in Wrexham should be established, not to clash with the assizes or the field sports. And then he had to make sure that the writing on every medal was decided on. And you get the impression that Ifor Kerry was quite a fussy person from these, but because he was concerned about the details, that meant that things went so well in Wrexham, and of course he and W.G. Rees worked well together as friends. It was Sir Watkin who had the vision to hold the Eisteddfod on the 13th and 14th of September, because the Wednesday agriculture show was to be held just afterwards. And the North Wales Gazette noted
the surrounding counties were assembled together, and the town wore the aspect of holiday splendour. Rwan, mi fedrwn ni fod yn feirniadol heddiw wrth allan.
We can be critical of comments like that today, but the local committee depended on these rich people, because they were the ones, only ones who had disposable income, and the families had been patrons of the bards in the past, which had, disappeared from many families by then. But if they wanted the Eisteddfod to be supported and respected, they had to do it this way. And one of W. Rees's hybrid was respectable. And in
Ar Ebrill y 4 1821.
W.J. Rees was a great writer of letters. In April 1821, he said to Eva Kerry, I have not been little engaged in Cymru'n matters such as at Kerry. I have written 12 long letters first weeks and 10 from my return from Herefordshire. The next Eisteddfod to be established was the one in the province of Gwent. W.J. Rees came back tired from the Caernarfon Eisteddfod, and he felt that writing all these letters was heavy, and therefore there was a tinge of sadness in the letters of Thomas Brennan to the Bishop of St David's. But they could say that Sir Charles Morgan had met a number of the landholders around Brecon, and that they were in favour of establishing as Eisteddfod. W.J. Rees asked the Archdeacon of Davis, vicar of Brecon, to call a public meeting. And Thomas Rogers and Thomas Brennan agreed on Brecon because Cardiff nor Abergavenny were ready to act. In the meeting, W.J. Rees read a message from the Powys Provincial Society, wishing well to Brecon, and he gave a very detailed address. He said first why the meeting was being called, and talking about the main names of the Cumbrian societies. He spoke about their ancestors' sponsorship of literature in Wales, and their duty to do the same. 18 centuries before this, people across Europe spoke a language of the same roots as Welsh, but that had disappeared now, apart from Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and Brittany. But Welsh had resisted the Saxons, the Danes, and the Normans' conquest. And then he talked about the early writers of Wales, cos Sylwian Nennius, and Neirin Tylwyth Iesin, Meirin Golchmai Candelw, and Hywel Dda's laws. A lot of this literature had been lost, but in case that would happen again, it was important to collect and secure manuscripts. But there was much more to be done. The Eisteddfod gave the prices for essays in the Welsh language, in the English language, and gave an opportunity to describe, to producing books and other volumes. And then he dealt with the arguments of people who were against teaching Welsh. And who were saying that the Welsh Society, the Welsh societies were preventing progress in English. But people said the Welsh language was on its way out from the building of the of Dyke, and he warned about changing the language in the church for the sake of a few English speakers, and that would have scared people away to the chapels. Why didn't the English people learn Welsh? And then he talked about the law courts, and said this was an argument for the judges and the lawyers to learn Welsh. He said it was so important for clerics, doctors, and landowners to learn Welsh. The English language didn't need any more support. It was already compulsory in education and in the church. But the Welsh language would live for many generations to come. it wasn't the society's work to prevent the teaching of English, but to promote the Welsh language among the gentry in Wales. And then he asked why didn't this part of Wales between Glamorgan and Radnor, famous for its bards and poetry, why didn't it have its own Welsh societies? He talked about how the recent Eisteddfodau have been so successful, and how the one to be held soon in Brecon would be successful. Well, 2 centuries beyond then, we still have to counteract the arguments that this rural priest dared to oppose. He stood before a congregation of gentry who had mostly lost their Welsh language and looked at the Welsh-speaking people as lower orders. But this hero was telling them that Welsh language was of such a great background that they should learn Welsh. It was a strange thing for these kind of people to look on Welsh language as something to be proud of and to support. Only a person who loved his country and its culture so much would have been brave enough to address that assembly in 1821 and to be appreciated for doing it. Back in the toilets of Casgob, he was thinking again about the network Eisteddfodau. Would there be another Eisteddfod in 1823 in Carmarthen? How did things look in Brecon? He went to Carmarthen in July 1822 to see the officials there, and in Brecon on the way back, things looked very good. And Iolo Morgannwg Gwallt John News were the adjudicators of the poems. If he'd seen what Iolo said about its co-adjudicated Gwallt maybe not, would have been not so happy. What demon of the bottomless pit appointed Mr. Hughes of the judges, one of the judges. In 1827, W.J. Rees was in Lampeter when the college chapel was consecrated. He went on there to Llandovery with the vicar, stayed the night, and then went to Carmarthen the next day. And then for years he was writing reports of the consecration, preaching twice in St. Peter's Church on Sunday. And seeing there was a bigger congregation he would have in Radnorshire. Another week, he was on the road again, going through Swansea and Neath to Merthyr Tydfil Street. That was 36 miles. He was going to call that chapter Iolo, as requested by Ifor Carey, to ask him look through his father's manuscript to see what their condition was, and to offer help in publishing them if possible. With Taliesin, he opened chest after chest full of Iolo's manuscripts all over the place. Taliesin thought that certain people had borrowed the manuscripts and never returned them, and he didn't know where to look for them. And W.J. Rees looked in amazement at this mess, and so it would take months to put them in order. He asked what the book of Gwynllan, and Taliesin said it had been published apart from the introductions, but he couldn't find those in all this heap of papers. There was nothing then to do then but for W.J. Rees to write a brief introduction himself. The Welsh societies wanted to support orders, and the provincial is what I published a list of books that had appeared or were going to appear, and in Carmarthen, 5 publications were noted, including the History of Wales gan Iolo Morgannwg. Iolo had said that he had enough manuscripts to publish History of Wales in 6 volumes, and the prospectus was produced. But the Dyfed Committee employed Thrussington of Iolo to put all the material into one volume, and they passed to provide financial support for him doing that. The next book on the list was Cywydd y Diliw by David Ionawr. The second book was the works of Hill Morris that Gwynllan Mechain was editing the time, and the 2 volumes appeared in 1823, and the name is Ceiriog. And then they note a Welsh grammar, Dr. J. David Rees, now publishing at Carmarthen. This was Sean Davies Rees's grammar, and it was published in Latin in 1592. It wasn't noted who had edited it, and it wasn't published in the end. And then the Cambro Britain was noted as a new publication. W.J. Rees, like the other literary parsons, had a large library. He made copies of the Gododdin when the manuscript was in possession of Ellis Jones, and he always wanted to add to his library from the bookshops in London. In 1836, W.J. Rees was present in the annual meeting of the Cymreigyddion in Aberfenny, invited probably by Carney Hanawc. And it was Carney Hanawc who persuaded Taliesin Biola to republish his father's manuscripts, a short review of the present state of Welsh manuscripts. In the annual meeting, from the meeting there came a new movement.
Seconded by Benjamin Hall of Llandovery, Esquire, MP, that a society should be formed for the purpose of printing ancient Welsh manuscripts, after which a provisional committee was appointed. Roedd W.J. Rees yn aelod o'r pwyllgor.
W.J. Rees was a member of the committee, and between then and 1837, when the society was formally established, many promoters were noted, including King William IV, and Rees was a member of the executive, and William Rees Llandovery would publish the society's work. We want a little puffing and publicity in the Welsh newspapers. And W.J. Rees edited the first volume to be produced, which is Lyfr Llandovensis, Llyfr Taylor, the ancient treasure to the Cathedral Church of Llandaff. That was in 1840. King William had died by then, but Queen Victoria became the head patron in his place, and her name is seen on the frontispiece of the volume. In March 1839, William Rees wrote to the Lysin a Bloelw,
sent a portion of the work to my brother, and he will take some time in editing and translating it. His
brother was Rees, who died suddenly in the following May, as we've heard, and he was supposed to edit the work, but W.J. Rees didn't mention that in his edition. W.J. Rees set about preparing an edition of the Llandovensis, And
I suffered from
400 pages had been produced when he said,
get up without great difficulty and pain. I attributed it to cold and prolonged sedentary employment, the transcribing of matter for a volume of upwards of 600 pages, requiring close application. Roedd yr ail gyfrol a olygodd W.J. Rees i'r
the second volume that W.J. Rees produced for the Society was a work that had been done by Rees, which was The Lives of the Canberra British Saints. And in the introduction, W.J. Rees said,
Professor Rees on the Welsh Saints. A wedi'r gyfrol ddod o'r wasg ar ddiwedd y flwyddyn 1840.
After the volume was published at the end of the year 1840, and it saw an old manuscript of Iolo Morgannwg's, which was a copy of the one that he knew nothing about.
Or to some transcript therefrom. Had I seen it sooner, I should have referred to it in the preface. Ro mi gafodd y gyfrol groeso yn y wasg. Erbyn hyn,
the volume was welcomed. That has, by now, more recent scholars have produced editions with later scholarship. But Jacob Gwinllan really shouldn't have said in the introduction to the 1893 edition, thanking his co-workers in the Bodley Library.
Or to be preeminently safe. Sut bysai arno fo tybad, sa fo'n gweithio ar ei ben ei hun.
That's how would he have been able to do it, working in a remote rectory with all his church duties. In reading W.J. Rees's letters, we are reminded that he was a committed rural dean and parson. He talks about clerical meetings, visiting churches, and holding services on the Sunday. He often says that his duties on Sunday were difficult for him after being on a long journey and being involved with the Eisteddfodau. He gave much of his time to arranging clerical meetings. It was easy for a rural person with nobody much to help him in the community. It was very easy for somebody like that to become lazy and just to give all his time to secular work in rural Radnorshire. There would be just 7 or 8 clerics coming to our meetings every month or two, and in bad weather it was difficult to journey. But W.J. said rules for the meetings, and including that nobody should be absent without good reason. W.J. Rees died on the 18th of January 1855 following a stroke, and he was buried in Casgob cemetery. He was 85 years old and had been the rector since 1806. It's noted that he had been a JB in Herefordshire, and noted this.
Who associated with Bishop Burgess of St David's in the revival of the Welsh National Eisteddfod and promoting the study of Welsh literature. Gwynllan. Trychwantodd I oes 2 fudiad dylanwadol yn yr eglwys. Yn ei blynyddoedd cynnar, roedd Hywel Harris.
He was involved in 2 movements in the church in his early years. Daniel Rowland, William Williams was still alive. In his last years, he saw the effect of the Oxford movement on the church, and seeing people like Nicander and Abisil using the the Welsh press to promote that. He wasn't a Methodist or a Tractarian, but he could never be accused of neglecting his own spiritual development or that of his parishioners.
To forgo individual comfort, meddai, yn un o'i lythyrau. Byw heb lawer o gysuron I gyfoeswyr wybyddol nath o yn ei reithoriad.
Lived without many of the wealth that the people he worked with did. Largely through his work, the Eisteddfod grew to be important establishment with the support on the church, and he wanted, like Ifor Kerry, to see published the old literature Wales. W.J. Rees survived many of his colleagues, Ifor Kerry, Gwynllan, Canianach, Bawd Iala, William Bampale, and Bishop Burgess. And even though later scholars have looked at the faults in the productions of these people, they must be praised for their commitment and their great zeal for the Welshes of the church, when that was often looked down on and ignored. Thank you very much, Meg, for a very learned contribution and taking us in, many of us, into territory which we're not familiar with. And I feel this family should not be ignored.
Wel, pleser o'r mwyaf nota yw cael cyflwyno ein hael siaradydd y bore yma. Mae Densil Morgan, yr athro Densil Morgan, yn frodor o Dreforys, Cwm Tawe, a cafodd ei addysg ym Mhrifysgol Bangor a Phrifysgol Rhydychen. Bu'n athro diwinyddiaeth ym Mangor o 2005 hyd 2010, ac yn athro diwinyddiaeth ym Mhrifysgol Cymru y Drindod Dewi Sant Llanbed o 2010 ymlaen. Bellach mae'n athro emeritus yno, ac yn weinidog hefyd ar gylch Eglwysi Bedyddedig Gogledd Teifi. Cyhoeddodd yn helaeth ar grefydd a diwinyddiaeth yn Cymru ac ar fywyd a gwaith Calbat, y diwynydd mawr o'r Swistir. Ymddangosodd gyfrol gyntaf I astudiaeth y ddwy gyfrol Theologia Cambrensis yn 2018 a'r ail The Long 19th Century ym mis Medi 2021. Heddi bydd Densil yn trafod gwaith Edward Morgan, Syston a John Owen, Thrussington. Croeso mawr, Densil.
Diolch yn fawr, Hywel, a diolch yn fawr I Meg hefyd am yn goleuo ni mewn papur ardderchog wir de. Dwi wedi paratoi gormod. Mae Sean Aled wedi cael y sgript, dwi'n ymddihiro I Sean yn awr o ran y cyfieithu, achos dwi'n mynd I orfod hepgor cryn dipyn o'r un dwi wedi paratoi a neidio te. Ymddihiriadau am hynny, dwi'n mynd I hepgor y rhagymadrodd a mynd yn syth at y ddau ffigwr byddwn ni'n sôn amdanyn nhw. Felly yn gyntaf, Edward Morgan a'i ddyddiadau ef oedd 1783 hyd at 1869. Cynnyrch Methodistiaeth Morganwg oedd Edward Morgan. Yn frodyr o'r Pîl, ychydig filltiroedd i'r gogledd o Borth Cawl, ac ychydig filltiroedd hefyd y tu hwnt I ffin orllewinol y Fro, mi oedd yn fab I Dafydd ac Alice Morgan tu Tynglwst, sydd erbyn hyn yn fferm laeth lwyddiannus iawn. Y 7th o fis Tachwedd 1783 oedd dyddiad I fedydd.
Morgan was educated in the Sweden Llangrafo, the next Barito Llangan, in a school which was held by the curate of the parish, who became the rector later, Henry Phillips, who came from Talasachai, who was converted when he was a youth in Carmarthen Grammar School, and he was unusually not convinced by a particular preacher, but by reading the New Testament for itself. He was a loyal Anglican, and he sought ordination, and he was ordained by William Stewart, Bishop of St David, the curate David Pugh, the evangelical rector of St Mary Church in Newport, Pembrokeshire.
A boy 14 years of